We're going to be reading Matthew chapter 18 today, part of it, the first 9 verses of it today. Before we do that, I want to tell you that there was one day when I walked into the living room and I looked over and I saw Andrea, and she's looking at Facebook, right? And she was watching some kind of a video, and it had really gotten to her emotionally. And I was like, what are you watching? And she showed me this video, and it was one of those scenes where military dad had come home from being overseas for 2 years, and he gets to be reunited with his son, and everybody's clapping. It was very emotional, very, very, cool to watch that sort of thing. But I think when I watch those videos, my favorites are actually the ones where the wife has some type of announcement she wants to tell her husband. I don't know if you've seen those, and I don't know if this is queued up ready to go, but there is one in which a wife and a husband go on a photo shoot, and he's supposed to supply her with 3 characteristics about her on a chalkboard. She does the same thing, except hers says something different. Let's see if it works. He is like, wow, I just love those scenes. We had friends who just went through that, and they were telling everybody at Quaker and all around, hey, we're going to be having a baby, and they were so very excited. I love that. Well, I have an announcement for you today. Andy and I are not pregnant. She's like, what? What are you going to say after that? I don't know. I'm scared that you would know this and I wouldn't. No, we're not going to have a baby. But similar to that, one of the things that happens in Matthew chapter 18 is Jesus tells the apostles that you are going to be spiritual parents. You are going to have children, and you're going to have to raise them correctly. And we as a church need to understand whether you have children, whether you plan on having kids, if you're part of a church, if you are following Christ, you are called to disciple someone. Not only to be discipled, but to disciple someone, to be a spiritual parent. My objective over the next several weeks is for us to be readily equipped using Matthew chapter 18 to maintain what we have and even to restore what we may have lost. So Matthew chapter 18, that's where we're at. Read with me, verse 1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of God? Now, the idea of what is great has plagued mankind since Genesis chapter 3. She eats the fruit because she wants to be like God. There is no one greater than God. She wants to be like God. People always want to become great. In fact, 2 chapters after this, James and John's mom comes up and asks Jesus, would you put my 2 boys at your right and your left? The problem is, we as human beings, we have difficulty in understanding what it means to be great. When we look at this story, we must understand that Napoleon was wrong when he said God is on the side of the strongest battalion. The Bible shows us this is wrong. Abraham took 318 men, defeated 4 kings and their armies. Gideon took 300 men and defeated an army of thousands. You had the runt, David, who takes out a giant. God is all about redefining what it means to be great. Verse 2, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. What do you mean? Are you trying to say that you want us to go back in time? Jesus, are you trying to say you don't like people who have more wisdom than others, that have white hair on their heads? Not at all. He says, therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In verse 6, he says that a child is one who believes in him. And so it's like he's telling these disciples, you must change. He uses that word. You must be like these little children. You must change. You can no longer worry about greatness according to mankind, but greatness according to God. Follow my example. Humble yourselves before others. Seek to serve and stop trying to become great. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, he says. Now I love this because he changes the context. No longer is he talking about them changing. Now he's talking about how you treat someone who believes in Christ. He says you welcome them. And that word welcome in Greek means to take someone literally by the hand. To take them by the hand. And in the context of this illustration with the child, it makes me think of children and parents. I'll never forget, all three of my children, I laid them down in my lap, between my knees, in the hospital room while Andrea was sleeping. And I spoke to them when the lights were off and the light was just barely coming in through the shutters of the hospital. And I spoke to them, saw their little eyes open up, those little dark eyes, and they looked up at me, those cute little faces. And I knew at that moment I was supposed to take care of that child. I was supposed to bring up that child. I was supposed to raise that child. But knowing that child did not belong to me. That child belongs to God. And I'm bringing them up for this temporary amount of time so that they would not follow me, but follow Christ. And he affirms their idea that they are the spiritual parents. And he says, if you would just welcome them as a child, it's like you're welcoming me. Now that word welcome also means educating, also means training, bringing them up, teaching them something. What do we teach them? Jesus says, verse 6, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble. The ESV says sin. Here it's more correct, but the ESV gets to the heart of it. To stumble, to sin. It would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. There was two kinds of millstones at that time. The kind that you do with your own hands in your front yard outside your house right next to the door, and the kind you needed a donkey for because you had so much grain. And Christ said, I'm not talking about a small one, I'm talking about a big one. Wrap it around their neck, throw them in the ocean. It is better for them to suffer that. But notice he doesn't say, then what? I believe the then what is, then face me. He says, woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. The word woe is one of exasperation. It's synonymous with tragedy or despair. It's a pronouncement upon this world. He says, woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come. Sin exists. It's just there. You can't get rid of it now. I'll do that later. Woe to the world. One day, no sin will exist. He says, such things must come. Otherwise, maybe you wouldn't think you needed Christ if you did not sin. But woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off, throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. So we have a hyperbole. Please don't go home and start removing body parts, right? It's a hyperbole. And what it essentially means is this. If you do not want to sin, separate yourself from things that would cause you to sin. Very simple. It's like Potiphar's wife tries to sleep with Joseph and she rips off his clothes. What does he do? Runs right out the door. He is not about to fall to sin. If we think about things that cause people to sin, it could be, for one person, one drink of alcohol. That one drink could be something that makes them stumble over the edge into sin, to lose self-control. I knew a good friend of mine who loved sports, and I said, let's go watch a game. He said, no, I can't. I said, why? He said, I get red in the face. I get too mad. I don't watch sports. He's serious. He knew what it was that would cause him to stumble, to lose his self-control, and to maybe even say things he should not say. So he didn't watch sports. If your cell phone or your laptop is something that causes you to stumble, to look at things you ought not look at, it's best not to have it or to put it in a public space, confine it to a public space. For our youth, one day they will be so excited in that they have met someone for the first time that makes them feel all fuzzy in the tummy. A lot of you adults know what I'm talking about, and you get so in love. And then there's that moment where you've either found a good person or a bad person. You know the bad person because they will let you do whatever you should not be doing unless you're married. And if any of our youth ever, or adults, meet someone like that, you know what that means? Drop them like a bad habit, because that's exactly what they are. Separate yourself from things that might cause you to sin. Embedded within this hyperbole, Jesus gives us a very serious truth. Either fix it or you will face a judgment. Now the question is, verses 1 through 9, about them becoming these spiritual fathers, what does this tell us today? Look at 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. I just want to share this with you as kind of a catalyst for the remainder of the sermon. And the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. So what is he saying? Timothy, I want you to take things I've taught you, teach other people who are reliable, who will teach other people, right? This generational idea of passing on education, of welcoming people, of new believers. Titus does the same thing in chapter 2. You see, each and every one of us need to realize that if we are called to follow Jesus Christ, we are also called to disciple people, to teach, to educate, to bring people up. So, to be a spiritual parent, there's essentially three things that just these 9 verses tell us. Number 1, obviously, you must believe in Jesus. Obvious. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how good your grammar is. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care how many books you've written. You can do all the same things with that an atheist could do, but an atheist could never create a spiritual disciple. An atheist could never have a spiritual child. An atheist could never disciple one in Jesus Christ. Each and every one of us are called to change, to give up what we thought it meant to be great, to do what Christ has called us to do. Number 2, you must accept the role Jesus reveals here. I wonder, this is a dumb question probably. Do you remember right then when COVID started, right when it started, how everyone had to isolate, right? And so if you went to go visit someone, what did that look like? You went and visited them and you kept 15 feet. I remember going and visiting my mom and dad over there in Fort Worth, just a couple blocks away. We'd pull up right next to the curb. We'd look outside and say, hi, Mom and Dad. They'd say, hi, and we love you, you know. And it felt so weird. You know why it felt weird? Because I'm their son and I want to give my parents a hug. My kids wanted to give them a hug. My wife wants to hug them. We did 2 weeks of that. We're like, enough of that. We don't care if we get COVID. We got to have a hug. We love you. The thing is that when we follow Christ, there's a temptation to do it in isolation, to do it from the curb, and to watch and see Jesus in the middle of the road waving, beckoning you to come in and say, no, 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 I can't do that. You see, as followers, we are supposed to follow and be in His presence. And if we're supposed to be spiritual parents, we need to actively do that. Thirdly, and probably one that gives us more conflict with the world than the other two, you must have the same attitude as Jesus towards things that cause sin. Our family just started watching a neat show. Andy and I had watched a few episodes before, Duck Dynasty. And so the kids hadn't seen it. We started watching that with the great bearded patriarchal wonder, Phil Robertson. And my favorite episodes are the ones where he clashes with the younger culture. He walks into the basement one day and he looks down and he sees his two grandsons playing Xbox. And he starts to talk to them and they don't respond. They don't say anything. They don't hear him. They don't know he's there. So he walks down the steps, he walks in front of them, gets between the Xbox and them, and he grabs the cords of their headsets and he starts to shake and says, take those things off, take those things off, take those things off, take those things. Just annoy them until finally they take them off. They look at their granddad realizing he's there. He said, hey, Mama Kay wants us to go get some crappie for dinner tonight. Let's go. They look up at him and say, now? He says, yes, now. And so they all go and they go fishing. I love seeing those clashes there, especially when I start to think about how there's a lot of things that can make us stumble. You see, for one, it might be video games. For another, it might be fishing. You ever heard that song? Well, I'm going fishing. Looky there, I got to buy. The whole thing is based on the fact that his wife doesn't want him to go. He says, I'm going fishing. You know what else can be something that causes us to stumble? Our children, if we're not careful. They're not designed to be spoiled. They're designed to be lifted up and raised in Jesus Christ. Think about what Phil does. He stands between the two boys and the distraction. Just as Jesus Christ, when He was on the cross, stands between us and our sin. And He says, you got to choose. We need to make sure that we, of course, be spiritual parents, believing in Jesus, accepting the role He has called us to have, but also feeling about sin the way Jesus does. But the question for you today is this: are you going to do it actively, or are you going to do it inactively? Let me give you an example of inactive. There was a father who wanted to change his oil. And he went outside, he crawled underneath the car, and he tried to get to it, but the filter was in one of those really hard places, and then he realized he had to go get some tools. So he goes back inside, he's got all this oil on his face, he's got dirt on his face. His son sees him and follows him back outside. Dad, can I help? He says, just sit there and watch. He gets underneath, he changes the oil. When he gets out, he looks over at his son. You know what he sees? His son is a mess. He's got grass in his hair. There's dirt all over him. There's rocks. There's even smudges of oil that he has gone and gotten from some oil can in the garage while he was working. He says, what are you going to do? Your mom's going to kill me. He said, Dad, I just want to be like you. Now here's the thing. If you inactively try to disciple people, in other words, say, no, I don't want to teach you anything. I'm just going to sit here, you sit there. Maybe you'll learn by osmosis. They're not going to learn how you do things. They're going to learn a lot of times how you shouldn't do things, and they're going to do them. They're going to learn what it looks like to look like you're doing things. Let me give you an example of active discipling. Started when Andy and I decided to start coming to church here. So many wonderful people who poured into Andy and I, Jean, you, and Nita. Lyndon, you and Judy. I already shared this with Lyndon, but one of the things that he has done that has impacted me, that will be passed on for generations, and I used it in a text message this week, is I said to my wife, communication is a delicate art. He says that all the time. And I've started to say that. And it's true. But I learned so much from Judy as well. Judy used to come and babysit our children. And before we would even walk out the door, she would be down on the floor playing with Elijah or Lily or both. And she didn't do it like someone who was standing up, above them. She did it on the floor with them. She welcomed them. I still remember, though I think Lyndon forgot, I reminded him, but that when Andy and I found out that we were going to have Lillian, that the two of them were two of the first people we could think of we wanted to tell, and we invited them out to eat. We were going to pay for them. Of course, they wouldn't let us. But we wanted to tell Lyndon and Judy about the fact that we were having Lillian, because they meant so much to us, because they have welcomed us. And to go to the funeral yesterday and to see so many people there was such a blessing. I'll be honest, as a preacher, I would love to always have our people's funerals in this church, but isn't it great? Isn't it great when you can't, because they just welcomed people so well? They blessed people so well that there was no way you could contain within these walls the number of people that had been welcomed by Judy. Why? Because she was an active discipler. You see, each and every one of us are called to be disciples of Christ, and therefore disciplers. About a week and a half ago, I asked people on Facebook, what is the most rewarding thing about being a parent? And I got all kinds of responses, but one of the ones, the biggest one, was this: grandkids. I get to hold a grandbaby. Really what you're responding to is the fruitfulness of your kids to produce children, seeing the generational change and how you have passed on to them, they have passed on to them, and so forth. It is such a wonderful feeling. And if you were called to be a disciple and disciple people, the same thing occurs. You bring up people, and they bring up people, and they bring up people. Oscar Wilde once said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness. Well, I got news for you. In that equation, you and I are not great. Christ is. We're mediocre at best. And the best form of flattery is to try to imitate Jesus Christ. Our objective is to readily equip ourselves to maintain what we have and to restore those who get lost along the way. And I want to ask you this question today. Wherever you're at, wherever you go to church, can you imagine what would happen if in the next 5 years everybody at your church or everybody here at Anna Street decided to imitate Christ, decided to disciple other people? What would that mean for the church? What would that mean for the communities? What would that mean for us here? Well, rather than me try to answer it, let me read what Christ said. I'm the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit.